I would like to start by telling you about one of my great friends, Sebeksha. We connected through Discord during COVID, and she's one of the most flamboyant and brightest people I know. She said we were technically close neighbors. China bordered Nepal. She was also the first person who told me that I was advocating for something unique. We were arguing over, more like discussing, over periods. Yes, the onflow, as we call it, not the classes in school. I can't recall what we were talking about specifically, but suddenly she turned and looked at me and said, "You're indeed a unique advocate." It was not a compliment. She used the tone that one would use to say something like, "You're unique in your degree of stupidity." It was a bit uncomfortable at first, but I was able to embrace that name rather easily. Well, I indeed am an advocate, and especially of things like menstrual equity and broader social rights. So I believe that most of you today already know that the event is focused on the experiences of women and how many girls experience the world. So in my speech, I would like to share some of my experiences with you, just casually, like the conversations I've had with Subeksha. For the past 3 or 4 years, I've been working on a similar cause. Back when I was around 14, I joined a nonprofit called the PAT Project that fought for this cause. This nonprofit connects girls from all over the world, from Nepal, Pakistan, India, Australia, you name it. I was an advisor with them on hosting film screenings, awareness campaigns, and similar things. There was another girl I met, and coincidentally, she came from Nepal as well. Her situation was different from many other cases I've encountered. Her community practices something called Chohwa Padi Pratha, where women during their periods are banned from entering the house and are made to live in the cattle shed. They're also restricted from touching other people and from entering a temple. When I asked her if it was possible to host a community talk on periods, she looked at me and said, "Ma'am, this does not work." Normally, many people instantly think that this rejection stems from the shame of men or society in general. But she told me that it was the female community elders who were the strictest on controlling anything related to periods. This was one of the first mistakes I made in fighting for menstrual equity. I've identified the wrong authority figure. At the problem's roots, the main figures who are barriers to combating this issue may be the men. But when facing such unique conditions, we should approach the issue in a more direct way. For example, by finding a way to accommodate the apparent authority figures on the surface. Because it's honestly hard for us to deal with everything in one shot and solve the case immediately. In this case, it was the female seniors who were the barriers, who were the apparent barriers in the community. So, because it was technically a KPI of her ambassadorship, we decided to screen the documentary, Period, End of Sentence, to her friend group. Period, End of Sentence is a documentary that focuses on combating period stigma. Her friend group was not a huge group of like 50 people, it was just 5. So it could make its way easily across or around the authority figure, and which was technically successful. This project is not to say that in order for one to host a successful event, one may have to design it so that it avoids the authority figures completely. But rather, the point is that we need to be mindful of the cultural conditions each individual is situated in. Both individuals fighting for menstrual equity may have completely different cultural backgrounds, and thus, the approach you should take might be vastly different. Now, here's a story from last summer. I was in a village in Guangxi where I was supposed to be temporary teachers for children there. We were given the choice to choose a course of our liking to teach. I wanted to try English at first, but even now I don't have much confidence in my grammatical skills. So I asked if I could do something related to physical health. which was technically just a euphemism for a class on menstrual hygiene. I was cautious to propose this because you never know how sensitive or how open a community is to discussing such topics like periods. They, however, to my surprise, agreed. Having gotten confirmation a month in advance, I thought I would just space the workout nicely. I just had to submit 5 lesson plans, 3 PPTs, a few ideas for icebreaker games, and prepare as TA for other classes. So the ideal plan looked like this. I would space the workout evenly, make it like a ladder, and up the level a bit each week. But I couldn't really get anything done the first week, so the plan looked something like this. And then 3 weeks turned into 2, into 1, then bam, I had 2 days left. Then I started panicking. So I designed, made, printed all of my teaching material in 48 hours and turned everything in just as I arrived at the village. Now, let's time skip until I finished the first lesson. All of the children came running to me and hugging me, saying how much they enjoyed this new type of lesson, and even the program advisor came to me saying how much she appreciated what I've done. That did not happen. It was a very, very rough lesson with a very bad start. I had originally anticipated for the lesson to be inclusive to both boys and girls, but in reality, I had overestimated the degree of acceptance of such sensitive topics in the village. So, I talk about this incident because of one simple reminder anyone can get from it, which is if any of you are thinking about participating or hosting similar activities that fight for a social cause, do really give yourself enough time to plan and consider unintended consequences you may face. After knowing that this class would be taught together with boys, girls bursted into tears and even refused to enter the classroom at all. The boys, on the other hand, were indifferent to both the girls and the class itself regardless. So even though inclusive education is a crucial part in our journey to fight for menstrual equity, sometimes it is inevitable that we have to accommodate different cultural backgrounds we act in. But this obviously doesn't mean that we should stop when we confront a cultural barrier. It simply means that we have to gradually break down such barriers in a way that's less intrusive and less offensive. Now, fast forward a year later, where I hosted an awareness event for female factory workers. We worked on normalizing interactions with period products by drawing, stitching, sticking gems on pads. And while I was setting up and promoting the event by setting up roller banners around the factory, when I went back to the ones I've previously put up, the co-manager of the factory turned them around to face the wall and push them into the corner. And he advised me in a way, saying that I should quit talking about periods like he was my father. And another instance, as I was walking out of the gate of the factory, a guard, a bulky, professionally dressed man, said he wanted to advise me. He told me that I shouldn't host such events, as he paced around quickly and shook his head furiously, that girls who talk about periods openly cannot find boyfriends in the future, and will not be happy at all, and will be sad the entire day. So, I decided to call myself a happy girl. Most men I met in this event reacted in either an unpleasant or disgusted way about my openness in talking about periods. These are reflective of the general viewpoint coming from men, or in our modern day society, not specifically from men. But of course, there are many exceptions. Women and men do indeed have very different biological abilities, from internal hormones to bodily expressions, but this should not be the reason why we think it's unnecessary for boys to be aware of what 1.8 billion people worldwide are experiencing. The lack of awareness can be the exact knife that cuts back at menstruators. The lack of awareness makes many believe that periods are dirty, we have bad blood, and some even believe that it's a disease that's only passed on to women. The lack of awareness fuels period shaming, forcing many girls to use dirty pieces of fabric, dry leaves, old newspapers in substitute for hygienic pads and tampons. This does great disservice to our girls. This does great disservice to our boys as well, as they may have unintentionally caused harm to their loved ones. We teach boys to mask their care about periods. We teach boys to react to periods as something dirty, toxic, and contagious. Our attempts to stifle their knowledge of periods magnifies the embarrassment of all on menstruation. So, when you fight for a social cause, there are many things that need to be taken into consideration. It may be the background, authority figure, or cultural sensitivity that this social issue is intertwined with. Some may say that, well, this stigma surrounding periods is just our culture, so just stick with it. But culture is something that evolves and should evolve with time and people. If I lived a few thousand years ago, I would likely have been thrown into a fire pit as a sacrifice to a deity because I was a female. If my brother lived a few hundred years ago in France, he'd probably had his head cut off by the guillotine because he would speak something weird. We're the ones who make and define culture. We're the ones who should flourish through culture instead of being oppressed by the past. All this is to say that when we fight for menstrual equity, for example, barriers can exist in any form. Things may not be as straightforward as we would like them to be. But if we have a cause and if we're flexible enough, we can make change. Thank you.